Hello students, this is Mrs. Brister and you are watching a video lesson. During this lesson, it is expected that you take good and thorough Cornell notes, plus a reflection at the end. Today's video lesson is going to be on American Romanticism, 1800 through 1855. Patriotic and individualistic, urban and untamed, wealthy and enslaved, the Americans in the first half of the 19th century embodied a host of contradictions. Struggling to make sense of their complex, inconsistent society, writers of the period turned inward for a sense of truth. Their movement, known as Romanticism, explored the glories of the individual spirit, the beauty of nature, and the possibilities of the imagination. Writers of the Romantic period were witness to a period of great growth and opportunity for the young American nation. With that growth, however, came a price. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the country's size. In the years that followed, explorers and settlers pushed farther and farther west. Settlers moved for largely practical reasons, to make money and to gain land. But each bit of land settled by white Americans was taken from Native American populations who had lived there for generations. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, for example, required Native Americans to relocate west. As whites invaded their homelands, many Native Americans saw no choice but to comply, and those who did not were simply, and often brutally, forced to leave. Toward the middle of the century, Americans embraced the notion of manifest destiny, the idea that it was the destiny of the United States to expand to the Pacific Ocean and into Mexican territory. Mexicans disagreed, of course. When the Republic of Texas was annexed by the United States in 1845, it set off the Mexican-American War. Many Americans, including writer Henry David Thoreau, found the war to be immoral, a war fought mainly to expand slavery. Can there not be a government, he wrote, in which majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience? In the end, the United States defeated Mexico and, through treaties and subsequent land purchases from the Mexican government, established the current borders of the 48 contiguous United States. The stories and essays of the Romantic period reflect an enormous shift in the attitudes and working habits of many Americans. When the War of 1812 interrupted trade with the British, Americans were suddenly forced to produce many of the goods they had previously imported. The Industrial Revolution began, changing the country from a largely agrarian economy to an industrial powerhouse. The factory system changed the way of life for many Americans, but not always for the better. People left their farms for the cities, working long hours for low wages and harsh conditions. In addition, northeastern textile mills' demand for cotton played a large role in the expansion of slavery in the South. Writers in this period reacted to the negative effects of industrialization and commercialism, hectic pace, and lack of conscience by turning to nature and to the self for simplicity, truth, and beauty. From 1793 to 1860, cotton production rose greatly due to the invention of the cotton gin and other farming machinery. So did the number of enslaved workers. Plantation owners were the wealthiest and most powerful people in the South, yet they were relatively few in number. Most Southern farmers held few or no slaves, but they aspired to. They felt that slavery had become necessary for increasing profits. For slaves, life was brutal. Field workers, men, women, and children rose before dawn and worked in the fields until bedtime. Many were beaten or otherwise abused. And worst of all, family members were sold away from one another. Often, family members attempted to escape to be with one another again. Unfortunately, escapes were rarely successful. Tension over slavery increased between the North and South. Many in the North saw slavery as immoral and worked to have it abolished. Others worried as the balance of power between free and slave states shifted with each new state entering the Union. Romantic poets such as John Greenleaf Whittier wrote abolitionist journalism and poetry, and even Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published a volume of anti-slavery poems. Perhaps the greatest social achievement of the Romantics was to create awareness of slavery's cruelty. By the mid-19th century, many Americans had joined together to fight slavery and the other social ills of the time. Many leading writers of the Romantic movement were outspoken in their support for human rights. William Cullen Bryant, for example, was a prominent abolitionist who also supported workers' rights and women's rights. The abolition movement began by advocating resettlement of blacks in Africa, but most enslaved African Americans had been born and raised in the United States and resented the idea of being forced to leave. Instead, white and black abolitionists, including women, began to join together to work for emancipation. They formed societies, spoke at conventions, published newspapers, and swamped Congress with petitions to end slavery. In the 1830s and 1840s, workers began to agitate as well, protesting low wages and deteriorating working conditions. Many struck, but few were successful. A large pool of immigrants was always ready to take their places. Still, workers began forming unions, and slowly conditions improved. Women in the early 19th century found much to protest. They could neither vote nor sit on juries. Their education rarely extended beyond elementary school. When they married, their property and money became their husbands'. Many even lacked guardianship rights over their children. Throughout this period, women worked for change, gathering in 1848 at Seneca Falls, New York, to continue their long fight for women's rights. In the early 1800s, many Supreme Court decisions strengthened the federal government's power over the states. At the same time, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams established a foreign policy guided by nationalism, the belief that national interests should be placed ahead of regional concerns or the interests of other countries. Reflecting the national pride, and optimism of the American people, writers of this age forged a literature entirely the nation's own. For the first time, writers were not imitating their European counterparts. They were listening to their own voices and writing with a distinctly American accent. However, this new spirit of nationalism was challenged by the question of slavery. Up until 1818, the United States had consisted of 10 free and 10 slave states. As new territories tried to enter the Union, the North and South wrangled over the balance of power between free and slave states. Economic interests also challenged nationalism. Tariffs on manufactured goods from Britain forced Southerners to buy more expensive Northern manufactured goods. From the Southern's point of view, the North was getting rich at the South's expense. Sectionalism, or the placing of the interest of one's own region ahead of the nation as a whole, began to take hold. The early American Romantic writers may have been influenced more by the literature of another than by that of their own. Romanticism had first emerged in Europe in the late 18th century in reaction to the neoclassicism of the period that had preceded it. Where neoclassical writers admired and imitated classical forms, the Romantics looked to nature for inspiration. Where neoclassicists valued reason, the Romantics celebrated emotions and imagination. The first American Romantic writers grew out of this European tradition, shaping and molding it to fit their unique American identity. They too were reacting to what had come before, the rationality of the Age of Reason and the strict doctrines of Puritanism. Indeed, much had changed since the Puritan era in America, and the writers of the early Romantic period reflected the more modern sensibilities of their day. As the U.S. population exploded and the country's borders moved westward, American writers aimed to capture the energy and character of their growing country. They saw the limits of reason and instead celebrated the glories of the individual spirit, the emotions, and the imagination as basic elements of human nature. The splendors of nature inspired the Romantics more than the fear of God, and some of them felt a fascination with the supernatural. William Cullen Bryant's 1817 poem, Thanatopsis, went a long way toward establishing Romanticism as the major force in the literature of the mid-19th century America. Bryant followed the trend of the English Romantics by celebrating nature in his work. Romanticism was not only a movement in poetry, however. Washington Irving, the first American writer esteemed abroad, pioneered the short story as a literary form. He put America on the literary map and also influenced other writers, particularly Nathaniel Hawthorne. James Fenimore Cooper is remembered for writing the first truly original American novel. He celebrated the American spirit in all his frontier novels, known as the Leatherstocking Tales. The early Romantic writers were the pioneers of America's national literature, setting the course for those who would follow. Other writers influential in forging an American literature were the Fireside Poets, a group of New England poets whose work was morally uplifting and romantically engaging. The group's name came from the family custom of regarding poetry. Other writers influential in forging an American literature were the Fireside Poets, a group of New England poets whose work was morally uplifting and romantically engaging. The group's name came from the family custom of reading poetry aloud beside a fire, a common form of entertainment in the 19th century. With the Fireside Poets, the poetry of American writers was, for the first time, on equal footing with that of their British counterparts. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the best-known member of the group, stressed individualism and an appreciation of nature in his work. His poems took for their subject matter the more colorful aspects of America's past. Evangeline, for example, tells of lovers who are separated during the French and Indian War, while the Song of Hiawatha takes its themes from Native American folklore. Longfellow's fame was so great that after his death he was honored with a plaque in Poet's Corner of Westminster Abbey in London, the only American poet ever to receive such an honor. The other Fireside Poets, including Oliver Wendell Holmes and John Greenleaf Whittier, were strongly committed to using poetry to bring about social reform. They were interested in such issues as abolition, women's rights, improvement of factory conditions, and temperance. They also championed the common person, perhaps as an outgrowth of the form of democracy that had been sweeping the land since President Jackson took office in 1829. Jackson had crusaded against the control of government by the wealthy and promised to look out for the interests of the common people. One can see this regard for the common person in the work of Whittier, for example, who wrote of farmers, lumbermen, migrants, and the poor. By the mid-1800s, Americans were taking new pride in their emerging culture. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a New England writer, nurtured this pride. Emerson led a group practicing Transcendentalism, a philosophical and literary movement that emphasized living a simple life and celebrating the truth found in nature and personal emotion and imagination. Exalting the dignity of the individual, the Transcendentalists stressed American ideas of optimism, freedom, and self-reliance. The term Transcendentalism came from Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher who wrote of transcendent forms of knowledge that exist beyond reason and experience. Emerson gave this philosophy a particular American spin. He said that every individual is capable of discovering this higher truth on his or her own through intuition. The Transcendentalists believe that people are inherently good and should follow their own beliefs, however different these beliefs may be from the norm. Both Emerson's essay Self-Reliance and Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience address this faith in the integrity of the individual. This is now the end of the video notes. Students, make sure that you do complete a Cornell Notes reflection if you would like credit for this assignment and submit them to Mrs. Brister. Thank you.